Here's the dark side of Hansel and Gretel. A familiar story, or so you think. There's actually sinister details downplayed over time.
Many children died before they reached maturity.
Details such as child abandonment.
Children were abandoned.
Cannibalism.
Cannibalism undoubtedly occurred.
You'll join me for breakfast. And I'll have your scrawny little sister for dinner.
And the murderous and vengeful thieves who just may have killed their witch of a mother. Then vengeance also propels the heroine of our next story in the most celebrated fairy tale of all.
But I don't want to cut my foot off.
But it's nothing like you remember. No glass slipper and no fairy godmother.
Just a moment of agony.
No.
A lifetime of luxury.
But lots of blood. And body parts.
Wicked stepsisters would have their eyes pecked out by birds.
The story of Cinderella and the stepsisters. Journey beyond Once Upon a Time and Happily Ever After into a dark, enchanted and dangerous world. Rediscover familiar tales but with a blood-soaked twist. Collected here are the gory and shocking bits from earlier versions. Now, Hansel and Gretel and Cinderella on Scary Tales. Once, a long time ago, a boy named Hansel lived with his sister Gretel in a little cottage by the forest. Like many children of an earlier age, Hansel and Gretel's dreams were often haunted by the spectre of hunger because there was a famine gripping the countryside.
I knew marrying you was a mistake. I should have stayed with my parents until some rich man courted me.
Hansel and Gretel plays into some extremely, seemingly primal human fears. Fears of famine, fears of being devoured, fears of being abandoned.
I was meant for finer things than a woodcutter's wife is likely to see.
Wife, I didn't cause this famine.
You're not doing anything to fix it either. Why don't you do something?
Do you propose I do?
Those spoiled brats. They're the ones eating us out of house and home. We have to be rid of them. There are too many mouths to feed.
These are our children. Our family, we just can't abandon them.
We're starving. Lead them into the woods. And we'll leave them.
Europe was racked with periodic famines, the worst of which occurred in the 14th century. During those times, people would do anything. I mean, they would give up their children, give up their wife or husband, you know, anything, sell their bodies, anything to fill their stomachs, because without that, they had nothing else. They would be dead.
They'll be better off. Would you prefer to watch them starve?
So in the Great Famine of 1315 in medieval Europe, imagine Hansel and Gretel overhearing the conversation of their parents, deciding to abandon them in the woods, and that was a real terror. It was a real possibility.
Things will be better once we're rid of them.
The darker elements of these stories were put in medieval times, not as embellishments, but because that was a real part of everyday life. People were living on this, you know, starvation, scary existence.
The Brothers Grimm first recorded the familiar Hansel and Gretel story in 1812, a more Germanic variation of an ancient tale. At that time, famines were still sweeping through Europe, including Germany, as they had for centuries.
It's what must be done. We have no choice.
The woodcutter was horrified at his wife's solution to their dilemma, but he reluctantly agreed to abandon Hansel and Gretel in the forest the next morning. But Hansel was a clever boy, and while the rest of the family slept, he immediately went to work conceiving a plan. He noticed that certain rocks glistened in the moonlight, and he set about collecting as many as he could.
In 1315, the Great Famine began, which resulted in the death of 10 to 25% of Europe's urban population, and no one bothered to count people in the countryside who died.
Are you lazy bones out of bed yet? We'll not wait a minute longer. You need to go now. Here's something for your lunch. There's nothing else. We have nothing left to feed you.
We do know, say in the 14th century with the Great Famine, children were abandoned. Parents sometimes hoped that by abandoning the child, the chances for survival might be greater.
The chief source of information, of course, are parish records, the writings of priests. These were the literate people of the time, and there were cases of people abandoning their children. This was actually fairly common whenever there was trouble. Children suffered the most and the earliest. And in the cities, of course, prostitution became rampant. You couldn't pass a street corner without someone offering themselves in exchange for a handful of grain.
They walked and they walked, and along the way Hansel dropped stones.
This'll do.
Finally, when they were deep into the forest, the family stopped to rest.
Hansel, Gretel, go and gather some wood and build yourself a fire just in case you get cold. Me and your mother will be over there, chopping wood. Be careful and look after your sister.
Many children died before they reached maturity, so parents didn't have the investment and the attachment to their children that we think of in the present day.
Their parents did not return for Hansel and Gretel. The two waited until night came to see if Hansel's plan would save them. Fortunately, it was a bright moon that evening, and the stones Hansel dropped along the way shimmered brightly and pointed the way home. They snuck into the house and fell fast asleep.
Children represented to peasant families in the past both a burden and an advantage. An advantage because the more children you had, the more family members could be involved in the tasks of agricultural production. And on the other hand, each new mouth to feed represented an additional burden.
The next morning, Hansel and Gretel's parents received quite a start.
Oh, my children. I'm so glad to see you back. I was up all night worrying about you.
Yes, Father. We're glad to be home. I'm so hungry, Father.
My word, the two of you will eat us out of house and home. I think, husband, that we're going to have to make another journey into the forest if we want to stay warm the long winter. Yes?
and fetch some water.
While it was never okay to abandon your children in the woods, so these are clearly bad parents, it was perfectly all right to sell your children into indentured servitude, to foster your children off as servants to a wealthy family who could afford to feed them, or if your children were very small and apparently were not thriving, it was okay to neglect weak children so that they would starve to death.
Coming up, Hansel and Gretel are left again in the forest.
Abandoned children would face imminent death.
But they're lured by a cottage made of candy, concealing a cannibalistic witch.
I'm going to put a little meat on your bones first.
Will they have what it takes to survive? And later, a maiden seeks revenge on her evil stepsisters.
The wedding ends in a lot of blood and guts.
Hansel and Gretel's parents failed to abandon them. Now their mother insisted they try again.
There must be some other plan. We've already abandoned our children once in the forest and they found their way back home. Maybe this is a sign that we're not meant to do this. We shouldn't try this again.
We've come this far. We need to see the path through to the end. We'll take them deeper into the forest. We need to make sure their little legs can't carry them back. If we don't, we're doomed to starve. Tomorrow.
This time they'll be well taken care of and they won't find their way back. We'll be all right.
Hansel set out to collect stones once again, but found the front door of the cottage had been padlocked.
Hurry up! We haven't got all day. Do you have the bread that I gave you? Yeah. Let's catch up with your father.
Quick, give me your crust of bread. But Hansel! Just give it to me.
The children in these stories often seem very young to be taking on all of these tasks and responsibilities, but we have to remember that in earlier civilizations and in earlier cultures, children, practically young adolescents, would be going to war and sometimes would be even inheriting kingdoms and becoming rulers of kingdoms at 12 years old.
Hansel and Gretel were well and truly deep into the forest. They traveled even further than they had before, and they were relieved when their father finally told them they could stop.
If you're hungry, why don't you nibble on some bread? Be sure to eat it all up.
Child abandonment in these times was unfortunately extremely common because it was a quick, if horrible, answer to an immediate problem. In real life, abandoned children would face imminent death and suffering, starvation, dehydration, possibly attacks by predatory animals, possibly murder by vagabonds or outlaws, these predatory types of people who inhabited the forests on the fringe of society and civilization in those days. Expectancy would be very short.
And just like the time before, their parents did not return to retrieve the two children. The next morning, the two searched for the crusts of bread, but alas, birds had eaten every one. After 3 days, they were hopelessly lost and ravenously hungry. And that's when they came across a magical little cottage, unlike any they had ever seen. And, in all likelihood, this was the only cottage of its kind in the whole world. A house made entirely of cakes, cookies, and candy.
It's a candy house. It's frosting.
Nibble, nibble, little mouse. Who's that nibbling on my house?
Hansel and Gretel went to work, immediately devouring the candy house belonging to the near-blind old woman.
Hello, my dears. How on earth did you find your way to my little house, hmm? You must be very hungry. Why don't you come inside and stay with me a while? You can eat as much as you like. No harm will come to you here.
Hansel and Gretel found the answer to their prayers. Enough food to make them plump and satisfied, but they were too naive to know her true purpose. Coming up, Hansel and Gretel are trapped in the witch's house.
There was a bandit who came up with the bright idea of eating his victims to get rid of the evidence.
You'll join me for breakfast, and I'll have your scrawny little sister for dinner.
Hansel and Gretel, abandoned by their parents deep in the forest, stumbled upon a house made of candy and inhabited by an old woman. Famished, they could not control themselves and began to eat the house down. That is, until the old woman invited them in. She fed them a mountain of sugary treats, and then the little ones fell into a deep sleep. But the next morning, Hansel woke up with a terrible headache and new accommodations, surrounded by the bones of all the little children the old witch had already made meals of.
I think the incidences of cannibalism are exaggerated in fairy tales for the horrific effect. But cannibalism undoubtedly occurred during the famine, the great famines of the 14th century. The area of modern Hungary was particularly badly affected, so much that the word ogre, which in French is related to hongre, which means a Hungarian. So the Hungarian area and the Hungarian people gained an unwanted reputation for cannibalism because they suffered so much from these famines.
Meow! Meow!
Oh, not just yet. I'm going to put a little meat on your bones first.
There are cases of cannibalism. One of the most infamous is from Scotland. There was a bandit named Sawney Bean who lived on the coast of Scotland in a cave, and who apparently came up with the bright idea of, after he robbed and murdered his victims, he came up with the idea of eating them to get rid of the evidence.
Get up, lazy bones. Fetch some water and fix your brother some breakfast. He's far too skinny for my taste.
She did as the old woman told her. She fed her brother cakes and treats, which he washed down with milk. Soon Hansel began to gain weight, And each morning, the nearsighted old hag would check on Hansel's condition to determine if he was fat enough to eat.
Stick out your finger through the cage. I want to see how fat you are.
But clever Hansel always presented a bone instead of his finger, and the near-blind witch couldn't tell the difference.
I don't understand. It's been 4 weeks now and you're still thin as bone. What's the matter with you, child? I'll not wait any longer, or I'll starve. You'll join me for breakfast, and I'll have your scrawny little sister for dinner. Go! Fetch some wood for the oven. I don't care if that brother of yours is skinny or not. Today, I'll slaughter him and cook him and make more than a few meals of him. Go! Did you fetch the water? And did you gather the firewood for the stove? Excellent. Let's see if it's hot enough. Crawl in, dearie. And let me know if it's warm enough to slide in the dough.
I don't think I can fit through the doorway.
Of course you can. There's plenty of room.
I can't.
Stupid girl. There's plenty of room. I am twice your size, and even I can fit in. Look! Ah!
Fairy tales need helpers. They need figures or birds or tea kettles that help the main character. What's lovely about Hansel and Gretel is that the helpers are siblings. The stories that were canonized, especially in Western culture, often feature rival siblings. In Hansel and Gretel, they help each other, and they really work together to get back home.
Gretel freed her brother, but before they left, she showed Hansel the treasure the old hag was hiding. For 2 days, the children wandered through the forest. Until they heard a familiar sound. When they saw their father, they ran to him, and the woodcutter was overjoyed to see them too. He'd not had a moment's rest since he and his wife abandoned them in the forest. Now his wife was gone, and he missed his children.
Some readers have looked at the witch in the forest as being just another manifestation of the stepmother, because of course when the children come home, the mother has been kind of killed off. I mean, the mother is gone.
And when the children opened the chest to reveal all the jewels they had taken from the witch's cottage, the woodcutter realized that their troubles were over. And they lived happily ever after.
Hansel and Gretel has possibly lasted so long because it is a story of triumph, the weak over the strong. We love the underdog beating the odds.
But hunger never stopped haunting Hansel and Gretel's nightmares. Coming up, a young servant girl is abused by her family.
Cinderella, you stupid girl. Honestly, it's unbelievable.
Women were considered property, as were children, and being subservient to men.
I have this, Father, and my memory of her. I will find her.
Cinderella is probably one of the scariest fairy tales, I think, because there's lots of blood and gore in that story.
The story of Cinderella. In the next scary tale, Cinderella, a story of mutilation, deception, and true love. A long time ago, there lived a beautiful woman who married a very wealthy merchant. Before long, they were blessed with a daughter, but soon after, the woman fell ill and died.
When these stories were being told around the fireside, life expectancy was about 35 years. Women died in childbirth, so it was a tough time.
The maiden's father had remarried a deceptive and vile woman with 2 equally nasty daughters. Out of jealousy, the 3 tormented and mocked the maiden, making her their servant.
And the fact is that because life expectancy was so short, and because something like 1/4 of women died as a result of childbirth, blended families were the norm.
Always covered in ash and soot, her stepmother nicknamed her Cinderella.
Have is in China in the 600s. But really, folklore predates literature and predates writing.
Cinderella is the most retold fairy tale motif on the planet. There's something about that that is so universal it shows up in virtually every culture and virtually every historical era. It is the story of being downtrodden and finding your way back.
Cinderella's stepmother was more impatient than usual, for that night the king and queen were hosting a grand ball, and the prince himself was going to choose a bride.
Cinderella, you stupid girl. Honestly, it's unbelievable. Tonight is the ball. Do you realize how much work there is to be done before your sisters make their debut before the prince tonight? I'll need you to wash and mend the dresses that I choose. Oh, and then I need you to clean this filthy house.
Cinderella, fetch my dress and make sure it needs no repairs.
Well, it probably needs some taking out.
It does not? How dare you?
Cinderella, I really do wish that you could join us at the palace tonight. Such a shame that you won't see it.
Oh, but Mother, she can. Don't you recall the invitation said every fair maiden in the land was invited? I'm sure that includes our fair Cinderella.
I have no interest in going to the ball. I would rather stay here.
And so you shall, dear sister.
Stop fidgeting.
The most immediate benefit of marrying a rich man or a powerful man was that you would have servants. The work of a common person in this era was incredibly hard, incredibly dangerous, because they had to do everything by hand, and the slightest problem, say, a twisted ankle, a cut while you're cleaning fish or something like that, becomes infected, you get blood poisoning and die. And there was nothing anybody could do for you.
Now, fetch me my peach ribbon dress with the cream rosettes and make sure it looks good as new. Well, go on.
A prince sending an open invitation to every young woman in his kingdom to come to a party and meet him, possibly marry him, is fantasy. That is not the way noble marriages were done. If you think about what happened to King Edward VIII in England, he wanted to marry a divorced American woman, and he had to give up the throne to do it.
After her stepmother and stepsisters left for the ball, Cinderella visited her mother's grave.
Dear Mother, my stepmother and sisters are so cruel. I wish I could go to the ball. I wish I could wear a gown and dance with the prince.
When Charles Perrault included the story of Cinderella in his 1697 collection of fairy tales, he added the familiar glass slippers, pumpkin carriage, and fairy godmother. But earlier versions instead had a magical white bird land in a tree by the cemetery to grant Cinderella her wishes.
One of the things that you will notice is that there is no fairy godmother. Instead, birds play a very significant role in this story. And here we see the bird is really a stand-in, a symbol for Cinderella's dead mother, who is reaching out from beyond the grave to help her daughter.
The magical white bird heard Cinderella's prayers and threw down an elegant gown and slippers.
These are the most delicate and beautiful shoes I've ever saw. Any girl could dance forever in these and still remain as graceful as a swan. But how will I get to the ball?
the white bird provided for Cinderella again, arranging very special transportation in the form of a magical carriage. But as Cinderella left for the ball in the carriage the bird had conjured up for her, she wondered if she would be recognized. Coming up, Cinderella meets the prince at the ball.
Wait!
Please let go of me.
But loses her slipper while trying to get home before midnight.
I have this, Father, and my memory of her.
Then she makes a truly crippling suggestion to her stepsisters.
You could always cut off your foot.
Women have always done, frankly, terrible things to enhance their beauty, their appeal to men.
Off rode Cinderella to the ball with her wishes fulfilled, but she'd also received a dire warning. Cinderella must leave the ball before the stroke of midnight, for it was at midnight that she would transform back into the humble Cinderella that everybody knew. No one recognized Cinderella as the lowly housemaid that she was. In fact, she even caught the attention of the prince.
The fact that in Grimm's version, the prince invites all the beautiful women in the land suggests an invitation to opportunity. It would have been an extraordinary opportunity for anyone to be chosen by the prince.
Cinderella could not believe she was at the ball, and she hoped soon to dance with the prince, who was bored beyond belief.
Now, the prince is a catch. He's a prince. He's rich. He's handsome. He lives in a nice house. So he's the object of courtship rituals that you would win the prize. So you are mating with a god.
Women were in a much more inferior position to men and were considered property. It would behoove the family to encourage the maiden to marry as well as possible at all costs. There would be very, very few options for an uneducated woman. She could become a prostitute, a servant, a nanny, a housekeeper, sometimes a tutor.
There was only one maiden who caught the prince's eye that night.
Look at this view.
I can't take my eyes off this view.
Your Majesty.
I've been watching you all night, ever since you arrived. From where have you come?
Oh, sir, I'm flattered that you've noticed me and shown to me so much kindness, but if you knew me as I really am, you would not find much to please your eye.
Silly modesty. And I thought I knew every damsel for miles and miles.
Miles and miles?
Miles and miles.
It's interesting, though, in Cinderella, Cinderella really wasn't a pauper. She really was a princess in disguise. She was the beloved daughter of a nobleman. And so there are theories that the prince recognized her as a princess, but if she really had been a pauper, he might not have been as interested in her.
I must go. Please, let go of me.
Just then, the clock tower bell struck the first gong of midnight. Heeding the magical bird's warning, Cinderella ran from the ball, losing her slipper as she went out the door.
He has only this token shoe made of glass, which is a very rare commodity. People think of glass as being very common, but prior to the 19th century, glass was not produced in industrial quantities, and it was almost as valuable as gems. People were taxed in a lot of places by the number of glass panes they had in their house, because if you had more glass, you were rich. In some countries, a glass slipper would not make sense, and so it would be a silk slipper, silk being, of course, the rarest and most valuable fabrics.
Word spread throughout the kingdom that the prince had met, but could not find his future princess.
What's on your mind?
I met a girl, Father. On the balcony at the ball. She's the one.
Of course she is. I'm happy for you. But nobody knows who she is.
She's one girl in one kingdom. I can ask everyone I meet who she is. I'll ask everyone in the kingdom. I will find her.
There are thousands of girls out there, and each one is going to say that she's the one. How will you know which one is telling the truth?
I have this, Father, and my memory of her. I will find her.
And so the prince went from door to door asking each maiden to try on the slipper, promising to marry the one whose foot it fit. But the shoe fit no one. Soon there were only a handful of homes left to approach. The day arrived that the prince knocked on Cinderella's door.
He's here. Girls, the prince is here. Sit properly and try to look sensible. Coming! Your Majesty.
Your prince. Madam, as I'm sure you already know, we are searching every household in the kingdom, looking for the maiden who captured my heart at the ball.
The weary prince did not even recognize Cinderella.
Both of my daughters were at the ball. Really had to be one of them. Come on, girls.
Your Highness.
Madam, neither is the girl I seek.
Well, come on, let's not be too hasty now, huh? Take a closer look. No? Well, Your Majesty, I actually hear that you're asking all the maidens to try on the slipper that the maiden was wearing when she left the ball.
Fair is fair, I suppose.
Great, wonderful.
I don't imagine there's much chance, much harm in having them try it on.
Fairy tales so often have a false bride or a false groom, someone who is trying to take your place. There are always people out there, pretenders to the throne, who will try to seize your property or try to make the shoe fit. There are all kinds of tricks that that characters have up their sleeves. So the stepsisters really are about deception, a cruel form of deception.
The prince's man struggled to fit the slipper on the oldest stepsister's foot, but to no avail. It would not budge past her large heel.
Well, obviously you can tell that she's clearly nervous. Right? Come on, Anne, come on. Yes, could I? Please? Thank you. Give us a moment, please. Come on, dear.
They left the prince and went to the kitchen to find a way to make the shoe fit.
Push harder!
It doesn't fit,
Why do you have to have such big feet? I mean, if you didn't have such big feet, then you'd be married to the prince right now.
You could always cut off your foot.
Is it supposed to be funny? You're disgusting.
It's not like you have a pretty foot anyways.
I still want it attached to my leg.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. She's right. This is the only way. It's only going to hurt you for a second. Just for a moment. And then you're going to have a lifetime of the luxury of being a princess.
But I don't want to cut my foot off.
No, it's cut off your foot. It will just be... It's just a little slither, that's all. That's all it is. There's no other choice.
Not without some pleasure, Cinderella selected just the right tool. In her heart of hearts, Cinderella was not displeased.
Mother says, "Do you want all the wealth?" And off goes the side of the foot, and there's blood and everything, which makes it unlikely that it was a glass slipper, but that's a late embellishment of the story. This is to say, we can be tempted to mutilate ourselves to fit into someone else's destiny, but it will not work out very well.
Women have always done, frankly, terrible things to enhance their beauty, their appeal to men. In the era of the corset and the bustle, it was not uncommon for women to remove a rib, have a rib removed surgically so their waist would be tinier. There was very little social network, safety net in those days. And the advancement of your family, of yourself, was hard to come by. If you weren't born rich and powerful, it was very hard to become rich and powerful.
Another gory aspect to the Grimm's version of Cinderella is they actually chop off parts of their feet to try to cram their big, ugly, smelly feet into this tiny, delicate shoe, right? It just shows the listener to what extent these foolish women, these foolish young girls are willing to go in order to get settled in life, in order to marry the prince.
Has something happened?
No, it's nothing.
Are you bleeding?
No, it's just a scratch, Your Majesty.
Excuse me, madam, please. Oh. What have you done to yourself?
Oh, dear. Well, oh, what a wicked girl. Honestly, she really has been the most willful and disagreeable child growing up. Really tough, you know, a handful. Unlike my youngest daughter, you should probably... It's only fair, Your Highness, right? Everyone has to try on the slipper, please.
I can do it myself.
Good girl.
Push. It won't go past my toes.
Wait, it's just excitement. Get up. It's excitement. You know, honestly, they're not used to this many people around. We're going to be back. Just give us 1 minute to have a talk. You over here.
It is extraordinary that the stepsisters are doing what so many women do today, which is to try to adjust their body parts to some sort of cultural ideal. Obviously, no one was cutting off their heels and toes, even way back when, but we do have foot binding, a cultural practice that may not exist today, but we have our own versions of that, plastic surgery that has gone wrong. So one could read that as a kind of cautionary tale as well.
Many cultures have found ways to modify the body in order to enhance beauty according to cultural values. The Asian custom of foot binding is one example of that, an example that's often been linked to the Cinderella story because of the mutilation of the foot.
Mother, it doesn't fit.
Oh, it's no use. You could cut off your toes.
What? Don't be ridiculous. That's absurd.
You trust me? Why?
I mean... Are you serious? You can't be serious.
Just a moment
Mother.
of agony.
No.
A lifetime of luxury. If you're in good.
No, please.
Should fit now.
Look, it fits. What did I tell you? What did I tell you? This,
Your Highness,
this, Your Highness.
It's me. I am your...
She is the maiden who captured your heart. She's on. I mean, honestly, you should have seen how beautifully it just slipped onto her toes. It literally curled right in. What a display. What are you...
Madam, really, what sort of family is this?
Your Highness, I really didn't. She's 10 times worse than her sister. Perhaps
I could try on the slipper.
And as if by magic, the prince's eyes were suddenly opened.
What about your servant girl by the chimney?
That's Cinderella. She's ugly as a goat.
Despite the protestations of your stepmother, would you indulge me?
She cooks and cleans. She can't even do that. Is this a joke? She wasn't even at the ball.
My princess, no quantity of rags, nor smut, nor tangled tresses can hide the beauty that captured my heart at the ball. Will you be my bride?
I shall if you will have me.
My princess, you've made me the happiest man for miles and miles.
Miles and miles?
Miles and miles.
It was the happiest days of their lives. Not so for the wicked stepsisters. For on their way to the royal wedding, a flock of birds attacked the sisters and pecked out their eyes.
Not one bird, but several birds in this case, exact their retribution on the wicked stepsisters by pecking out their eyes. It's the hand of the mother reaching out beyond the grave. It's the spiritual aspect of the story in which these young women are punished for their teasing and their exploitation of Cinderella in the earlier part of the story.
The vengeance detail in early folklore is a natural human desire, and it gives a kind of tidy ending. Especially if you're a relatively put-upon person, weak, poor, a slave, a servant, or something like that. You can imagine the people that have done cruel things to you, somehow magic will happen, and your ally, the little bird, will go punish them for you.
I think that these stories, the harsh justice of the folktale, reflects the point of view of the main character, and we need to see it as a kind of wish fulfillment. I mean, what child has not at some point wished that his or her tormentors would have their eyes pecked out by birds?
Many thought Cinderella a most fair princess, but not all, for truly, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And with that, we close our book of scary tales, for now at least, until another story beckons, another sun sets, another page turns.